Time under tension is essentially a nonsense concept. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. And when I say this, I am not saying that time under tension doesn't matter. I want to be clear. What I'm saying is what people have started calling time under tension training is basically just rehashing old stuff that's not based on anything that never really worked. And just concepts that guys use who use large amounts of gear just to do something different. And I really do mean that. And I'm not saying none of it even works. I'm just saying that it's just personal preference. It doesn't do anything. And we need to understand that it really isn't that big of a deal. And am I saying that the time under tension is not any factor at all? Of course I'm not saying that. Obviously, we're not getting jacked off of just doing one rep. Okay. Obviously, we need training volume. But what we need to understand, it is literally nothing to do with the tension time. When we are talking about stimulating muscle growth, you are talking about creating fatigue through mechanical tension in the muscle fibers that you want to grow. That's what we're talking about. And that doesn't necessarily mean heavy weight. It means you can create enough exhaustion with a lighter weight that you get to the upper threshold fibers and fatigue them. But there's a very simple way that we do that. It's called by doing reps. Okay, let me be clear on that. That can occur by simply getting close to muscle failure. That's it. That's all that's required. Okay, or going to muscle failure. I mean, that'll do it. Right? Whether that's 6 reps or 12 reps or 20 reps. Well, the concept is pretty much the same. Because what are we trying to do? What are we attempting to do to stimulate muscle growth? We need to recruit a muscle fiber, and we need to recruit it enough times that it's fatigued and stops recruiting. When we have to apply tension to do that, right? That is where we get a growth stimulus. When you take a muscle fiber and you exhaust it to the point where it doesn't recruit. Okay, that's a real good start. Okay, that's a real good start. That's a good way to make a muscle fiber grow. Okay, how about if you do it several more times in the same workout? Even better. Rest a few minutes and do another set. That's how this is achieved. But people want to overcomplicate some of these concepts. And here's the problem with it. A lot of times we shortchange that. And people will take a very simple concept to apply, a very complicated process in the body. We start talking Hiram's principle, rate coding, all that. That gets very complicated. It's actually fairly simple in the real world. Okay? You want to get to those muscle fibers, you want to recruit them, do a really hard set. That's it. You'll get there. Right? Now, obviously, certain exercises are only going to fully work the fibers in certain parts of the muscle. Okay? Certain ranges of motion or movements of the joints, because really is that a different exercise? Right? That is a different exercise. If you do a half rep versus a full rep, that is a completely different exercise. So it's really the same thing as us saying 2 different exercises, right? They're going to have a little different bias in the muscle, sure. But setting those individual biases aside, the idea is the same for any given exercise. Any given exercise, the best thing that you can do is to just do a really hard set with a normal tempo, under some degree of control. It's what all the data says, is what all the real world says. That's what we see. You'll get big. And for people who say, but this other guy did this method and he got big too. Yeah, but it wasn't that method. It's the fact that he trained and did some hard sets. Okay? Right? There's more than one way to do a hard set, guys. Oh man. Yeah, in anything that's a hard set, if you're actually working hard and taking a muscle through a reasonable range of motion, you're going to stimulate some growth. Yeah. Common sense. That is not that complicated. It really is not. All right. The problem is when they start talking time under tension, they're talking about trying to do super slow. Like we're going all the way back to the 1960s with the Vince Garanda 8x8 super slow method. Like this is very old concepts. Problem is it doesn't seem to work that well. It's never panned out. When you study it, here's what we find. a really slow eccentric versus a normal eccentric, doesn't seem to be any difference in muscle growth. Why? Because the eccentric, for example, is not that important under normal loads. And that upsets people like, their eccentrics are critical for growth. Well, they're part of the growth process. But realistically speaking, unless you're doing eccentric-based training almost with eccentric overload, and most of you are not, usually requires spotters to help, or it requires cheat reps and then to control the eccentric, then no, not really. Not really. Because we don't get the same fatigue. So they're like, well, we could slow them way down. But then it seems to create a nervous system fatigue that doesn't always recruit the muscle fibers the way that we want. And we know that because some of the older studies, even going back 20 years, are finding that when eccentrics, that's the lowering, starts exceeding about 4 seconds, it seems to cause less muscle growth. That's what they noted. And the reason being because we're getting into peripheral nervous system fatigue very quickly that just stops recruiting muscle fibers. Oh, and here's where it gets trickier. You guys ready? People go, yeah, but you get sore from it. We do. You do get sore from really slow eccentrics. But muscle soreness isn't inside the muscle fibers, is it? Ooh, that's been studied. Okay, let me state that again. DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, that soreness you get isn't actually in the muscle fibers. It's in the connective tissue. And it's your peripheral nervous system detecting the damage in the connective tissue. Oh man. So now we're coming back over to, but it has nothing to do with the muscle fibers. All right. Same thing, we could argue about faster or slower concentric reps as far as hypertrophy, fatigue, mechanical tension. We could argue about that all day long. Problem is we could argue both directions. Here's what I'm going to say at the end of the day. So therefore, the amount of tension time itself doesn't matter. It's not that relevant to muscle growth. Not saying it's irrelevant. It's just not as big of a deal as people make it out to be. Therefore, that's why people can train that way and still make good gains, because it's not a usually critical factor, whether you choose to do it or not. So it's probably not hurting your gains. It's probably not helping them. So again, people say, but this guy did it and he promotes it and his people get big. Well, because he hasn't trained hard. That's it. Probably has them do correct exercises, probably with the correct amount of volumes, with the correct amount of load. Well, that'll cause pretty good muscle growth, right? But that's what's going on. And at the end of the day, what causes the growth? Stimulating a muscle fiber, the ones you want to grow, with enough times, right? Did you get enough total repetitions of hard work yet? That's it. That's it. That is really what we are aiming for. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.